TESOL Pop, Season 11, Episode 10. What if the most powerful lessons were the ones your students create, in real time through their own words? Hi there, welcome to TESOL Pop, the mini podcast for busy teachers. I'm your host, Laura Wilkes, and in this episode, teacher and trainer Lewis Jaquest shares how using emergent language can transform our classes. He introduces his selfie framework. It's a practical way to capture and build on the language students are using. So it's student-led, reflective, and gives learners real agency. So let's join the conversation where Lewis shares what happens when we step back and let learners lead the way.
I think it initially started about 2 or 3 years into my career. So after I'd been teaching, sort of hands-on in company for a few years, I began to realize that what I was doing tallied a lot with some ideas based on something called emergent language, which back then I'd become aware of through Dogme, through Scott Thornberry's and Luke Medding's work, teaching Unplugged. And it was a little bit of a kind of moment of realization that, what I'm doing actually has a name and people talk about this and it's got some kind of traction to it. So it was really nice to sort of realize, there is something to it, what I'm doing. And I realized that it was also really having an impact on the learners who I was working with, because it was really helping them to say what they were trying to say rather than me bringing in course books and textbooks that were saying what they should be saying for them. And that was kind of robbing them of their voice a little bit, I thought.
Would you say with this approach you're taking to your teaching, it sounds a lot more student-led and a bit more bottom-up in terms of like who holds the power in the direction that the lesson goes, rather than top-down in that a course book and what's on the page leading the structure of a lesson? Would you say that's a fair analogy?
I certainly would say that's a fair analogy, because I think often at the beginning of a teacher's journey, it certainly was also my case, it's very difficult to let go. And you often think if you're not in control, then you're not really teaching. And you should have some kind of way of directing the learning. But actually, you have to find a balance, but by being a lot more, as you say, bottom up, allowing the language to develop and just being able to give cues and point people in the right direction, give them recasts, reformulate, or share really good language that they are bringing in, that in itself is learning in a kind of much more organic way for me, because what they're bringing to the table and into the classroom is maybe not polished, but that's the kind of group, the community's job then in the lesson. The group help to rescaffold it, to recast it, to reformulate it, and then work with language that is kind of ready to go and that they need and is useful for them in their business context or whatever walk of life they may be in.
Like you say, I can relate to that. It takes time for educators to kind of let go of the structures and stuff that we have. When you mentioned that this approach does kind of challenge maybe our own experiences and perceptions of our role as an educator, I think there's that layer to unpack. It's almost like riding a bike and you have the training wheels on. I feel that's like the course books I used to follow, my very detailed lesson plans that I had that I'd be looking at, that would take a lot of my attention as I was learning the craft of teaching. And it wasn't until things kind of clicked and I built those routines that I was able to take those training wheels off and then be able to adapt a bit. And, actually, this stage isn't working, or this activity isn't working. I'm going to change that. And then from that, I guess my role evolved from maybe more of a traditional model of teaching that I was used to more of a facilitator. This is just kind of what it's reminding me of in my own journey. It sounds like there's some parallels with yours too.
Precisely, yeah. I like the way you use the word facilitator, and I think a lot of it as well is connected to implicit and explicit learning, and the fact that you can't actually control what a learner learns, and I think the sooner you realize that, the less pressure there is also on educators and teachers to realize that the learner will only take with them what they are ready to acquire. You can help them, you can point them in the right direction of what is useful, but the most useful thing that they take with them is what they're ready to acquire at that point. And if you can somehow tap into what they are trying to say, then that's going to be probably a lot closer to what they really need than something that is sort of prescribed or enforced on them from the outside. Yeah, it's a mystery as well, isn't it? But and I'm not saying that everything that I bring to the table is going to be something they say, yeah, I really need that. But I'm sure there is some kind of intersection between what they're trying to say, what you help them with, and what they take with them. So we can only do the best we can, but giving them a bit more control over what's happening and their own learning and agency in the classroom, autonomy, I think at least helps in that learning process.
I'm curious to know what your typical lessons look like. Well, there's no such thing as a typical lesson, is there? But I wonder if you could give maybe a snapshot into the business English classes that you're teaching online and how these values in your teaching and your approach play out.
Yeah, I would say, what I mainly use in my classrooms is the selfie framework. So this is a framework which you can see on screen right now if you're watching the video. And basically it's split into 6 columns. And the first column is to capture what the learners are saying. So this is where I'm just listening to them. It could be as they come into the classroom, the virtual classroom in my case, and they're talking about, I don't know, work issues or how their day started or the traffic or whatever, or their first coffee and how good it tastes, but really just communicating. And I'm just listening and just adding the odd question here and there to foster conversation, and making notes. And this continues throughout the lesson, but maybe at some point I will just share with them what I've already noted down on the Emergent Language Framework that I just mentioned. And I would then either share with them good things that they've said, really nice, useful, relevant language, and also some reformulations of language where I can see what they're trying to say and they're not quite getting there, but I can see that as a useful piece of language for them or some structure that they are trying to use that they're not quite grasping. And we'll work on that together. We'll complete then the second column, which is what you could say, as well as working on meaning. And sometimes we'll do that in breakout rooms. The learners, have then the agency. They can go and look it up. They could go online or they know it, or they can make a guess about it. And then we'll come back together and work on what does it really mean in your context? Is it something that's in a different context? An example would be, for example, somebody in a class recently, and you'll see this on the framework, talked about an upcoming company. And they were really high-level learners, and they were working in real estate, and they were talking about a particular company on the market, which is growing and becoming successful. They were trying to say up and coming. They'd heard it. They knew it was something with coming, but they just got it a little bit mixed up. And so we explored that word because I thought this is a really useful piece of language to know and to have command over, because you can have up and coming companies. So exploring collocations, you can have an up and coming market, so emergent markets. You can have an up and coming singer or football player, actress, whatever. But you've also got upcoming as an adjective, like an upcoming meeting, an upcoming event, which is also a very relevant piece of language for written communication, in emails, in spoken communication, in general business communication. So we explored this through the whole framework with what you could say, upcoming or up and coming, looked at the meanings, and then the related expressions, which is in the next column on the framework: upcoming meeting, up and coming company, market. And then they went on to practice it. So making examples independently and in groups. How can I use it in my context? How is it relevant for me? Oh, we've got an upcoming meeting next week. Don't forget. for example. That's how I use this Student Emergent Language Framework, which I call the SELF framework, as a nice little acronym to help them to get a better grasp of the language that's flying around, and to be able to then identify what's useful for me and where can I go with this, which emergent language can I use that's relevant for me, and I can use in my everyday context.
And I think there's also something to add to this in crafting space for this meaningful kind of recording of language exploration that often I don't make enough time for in my own learning journey. And I'm critiquing myself as a language student. But maybe this is something I should do, just that slow down, a moment of reflection and deeper thinking rather than rushing through to the next thing. I think these type of resources, this Student Emergent Language Framework, the SELF framework you've created, really does kind of prompt and encourage teachers to think about how can you use this and how can you create that space and time for reflective thinking and exploration.
Yeah, it's really useful as well that you mention reflective thinking, because that really tallies with my beliefs as well in terms of reflection, because this document as well has led to my own, I reflect on my own teaching very regularly and how I can use this framework to help people even further. And I've also used it as basically a reverse engineered syllabus where you have 8 or 10 of these over whichever kind of period of time, which basically represent what the learners have uncovered over 8 to 10 weeks, or however many weeks. And I even went as far to do this with a couple of groups a few weeks ago, and they recorded a podcast based on the language that they had uncovered in the SELF framework. And they analyzed it over a few lessons, pulled out the main points, decided on which parts would comprise which sections of the podcast, decided themselves who would be speaking. They wrote jokes to tell in between, and basically they presented their own syllabus that they had uncovered, rather than typically covering syllabus or syllabi, as you might say, which are prescribed. And I just find that something that needs talking about as well in language and education in general, because it's so much more agency and autonomy involved if you let the learners scaffold their learning more themselves,
Lewis, I feel like we could record another episode about this because this is so exciting. There's so much to explore and unpack about this. And I don't think this will be the only conversation or thing you'll have in talking about this brilliant framework. I think there's a whole book and a whole series for you to write about it, because it changes the whole approach to which we teach languages. And that's incredible that you've created this. Normally, when we come to the end of the podcast, I invite guests to share a parting gift for listeners to go away and try. But I know you already have the Student Emergent Language Framework ready for folks to try. So I think that really is the perfect gift for them to have a go and adapt it and let you know how they get on. What do you think?
Yeah, most definitely. I really hope that people are inspired to just go and grab it off my website and to use it in the best way that they see fits to their context.
That's brilliant. I'm sure listeners will do that, because you said it's easy to kind of get started, it's fun, and it's something that you can do on a bite-sized level as well, just by taking a few small actions today, which is what we're all about here at TESOL Pop. Lewis, thank you so much for sharing this brilliant resource that you've created with the TESOL Pop audience and for your time today. It's been really inspiring talking to you.
Thank you, Laura.
So as Lewis mentioned, that resource for the SELF framework, the Student Emergent Language Framework, is on his website. And as always, I've included those links in the show notes so you can find those easily. Finally, you can support the work we do here at TESOL Pop by simply following this show, leaving a rating and review, sharing the episode to continue the conversation with your teaching community, or by even going to ko-fi.com/TESOL Pop to buy Haven and I a coffee.